Hi, I'm John Mitchell.
And I'm Jeff Fine-Thomas, and thanks for buying the course. We're glad you're here.
Let's spend just a quick minute talking about who we are and what we do. I am a financial advisor. I'm also a CFP professional. I've been working for about 25 years in that role, working with families and individuals. Jeff, how about you?
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I work with couples and individuals. I've been in private practice a long time, 20-some years now.
Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and jump into the first session. Do a couple of things that are a little bit nerdy here at the beginning. We want to give you some definitions and some basic, fundamental understanding of kind of how things work in the real world with money. And then we're going to start twisting things a little bit and starting to get into what we think is probably some low-hanging fruit that, quite frankly, society and education haven't really helped people with when it comes to money and relationships. So, Jeff, what is money?
Good question. So we have 4 ways in which we think of money, and the first one is just that money is an abstract idea. And what we mean by that is that literally there's an object, which is a piece of paper, a smallish piece of paper, or maybe a coin, that really by itself doesn't have any particular value, but our government and we as people decide that we're going to endow that money with some kind of value. Mm-hmm. And that allows us to basically avoid the problems of having to barter. So imagine trying to buy a shoe and you have a goat,
What do you do with half a goat?
Yeah, how do you,
exactly.
Yeah, right. So money is just basically an abstract thing. So that's our first way of thinking about money.
And it gets even more abstract because it's not just the paper. We used to, even a few years ago, we used checks, which was an even crazier idea, that you'd write your name down and a number on a blank piece of paper and somebody would accept that as some sort of currency. And now it gets even more strange. We have all of these electronic money software and packages and applications. I can stick my phone over the register and bloop, I've paid for it. So money is strange to start with, and in our society today, it's getting even more strange.
You want to talk about the example that is one of your favorites related to color?
Yeah, this whole basic idea that money is this strange thing that we're all trying to get our hands around. And it's this idea that maybe I haven't really thought about money and what it's actually doing to us in our relationship. Maybe I haven't really thought about how it is that we struggle with money so much. It may not be the money itself. It may be something else. So I love the videos that are coming out right now. You see them, the person who's struggling with their color vision. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're colorblind and their family has pooled their money and bought them this new pair of high-tech glasses that's going to allow them to see the full spectrum of colors that they haven't been able to see before. So Jeff, just imagine for a moment that you had never been able to see the color blue.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've never seen blue.
Never seen blue.
And imagine that I'm trying to describe blue to you.
Yeah.
I mean, can you even imagine how?
I can't imagine it.
So it would be really difficult for me to describe something that Jeff hasn't seen. And, maybe I could do something, maybe I could attempt to be clever and say, well, it's like green, just without the yellow.
Yeah, right.
That doesn't, yeah.
Right.
Still doesn't really help.
Doesn't work.
But when you watch those videos, the person puts the glasses on and boom, now they've seen something that they've never seen before.
Right.
And how does that reaction typically hit them?
Yeah, I mean, they're stunned and excited and overwhelmed.
But what's really fascinating to me about it is that they have always had the color of blue going into their eyes. It's not like blue is suddenly new and they're the first to see it. It's always been there. It just was hidden to them because of something that was blocking their vision. And so what we're going to start this process with you in doing is trying to make some things make you aware of some things that, quite frankly, you've been blind to, potentially been blind to. And if you're struggling in your relationship and you find at times that you maybe have some arguments about money, that spending, that budgeting creates a lot of stress, maybe this is the thing. Maybe there is something that you're not seeing. And through this course, we want to provide the opportunity for you to see some things that you haven't seen before. And just like this person who puts on the glasses, once they have seen the color blue, they can't ever unsee it.
Yeah.
Right? It's always there. And that now gives them some choices. It gives them some information that they will now always have.
Right, right. So let's move to the second way in which we think about money, and that is that money is a resource. So what do we mean by that? You imagine some of the common resources in your life, like, if you're a family that has an infant, sleep is a really important resource.
Really important. And there's not a lot of it. And we normally think of, when you talk about a family's resources, we're normally thinking about money. We're thinking about dollars. But we want you to think in a broader sense, just in this introduction especially, that there's a lot of things that you have that, quite frankly, carry just as much value to your relationship and to your family as the dollars themselves. And let's list a few of those. I mean, there's love. Wouldn't you say that love is a pretty powerful resource?
Absolutely.
In fact, it's a resource that we always say that money can't buy me love. Oh, okay, so that's a valuable resource. What about some of the other ones? I can think of like creativity.
Yes, absolutely. Kindness.
Kindness, and even some stranger things. I mean, there's some real concrete things. There's trees. There's beauty. There's natural gas.
Natural gas is a resource for sure.
If you're cold in the winter and you use gas heat, I mean, all of these things that we have access to is how we build our life with these resources. They are the building blocks. And we can have struggles in dealing with any of these resources, right?
Sure, because?
Well, I don't know why. Tell me.
One of the reasons is because they're finite. In other words, there's not an infinite amount of them.
Yes.
They're scarce. They can be scarce at some time.
So we're going to get into the next episode a little bit deeper into the idea of scarcity. But I want you to think about the idea that more often than not, when we run into a problem and we don't have enough resources to solve that problem, what is the number one word that we really want to come to play? And the one that I hear more and more is more. If I had more money, if I had more time, if I could get more sleep, if my family would be more patient. And the problem is more is not defined. It just says, it identifies the fact that scarcity exists. It identifies the fact that I'm living in a certain perceived deficit. And that creates a place where arguments and stress and bad feelings can show up pretty quick.
And also, I think it's really important to recognize that more is not always the solution to the problem. We can all imagine someone who's quite wealthy, if we're going to talk about the resource of money, who's also not happy. We can probably find lots of examples of popular culture of that. So having more of something, even though we might think that would solve our problem, doesn't always solve that problem.
We've all heard the stories about how lottery winners end up being more miserable, end up having poorer relationships with their spouse, with their families than they did. There's just no shortage of stories about people who come into large pockets of resources and, quite frankly, mess things up. So we want to understand and have some respect for this idea of resources. We want to have a broader understanding of what scarcity is, what it means. And where we're going with all of this is we want to, by the time we're done with these sessions, is have a roadmap that is specific for you about how you are best using the resources that you have to accomplish the things that are most important to you together.
So let's talk about the third way in which we think about money, which is that money is a kind of currency and it has a kind of movement. What do you think about that?
Well, sure. When I go to the store, if I'm a little kid and I buy soda, I give the clerk my dollar bill, and that dollar bill goes into circulation, and it may become the dollar bill that pays the clerk, who goes off and helps use that dollar bill to help pay their rent, and so that money moves along. And so the thing is that we have resources, and those resources have the potential to be put into motion. And when we put them into motion, We send them off, and we never see them again. And so there's a permanency to currency being in motion. And one of the things that I like to tell people is, hey, once you've spent it, you can't spend it 2 times. And that may sound kind of obvious, but if you think about it, some of the arguments that we have, some of the stress that we have around money is this moment that we realize that this resource is now depleted. These dollars are now gone. They've left us, and maybe we didn't get what we want out of them. Maybe we weren't in agreement about how they were going to be used. This is, again, some of the stuff that we're going to be digging into as we go forward.
Yeah, so it's areas of possible conflict, buyer's remorse, and all kinds of other conflicts. All right, great. So let's talk about the last way in which we think about money, which is that money has certain kinds of meanings that we give to it. So money itself doesn't have any particular meaning.
Yeah.
But we associate money with certain things.
Yeah, I mean, you got to really embrace this idea that money is really weird. Money's really weird because I can use the same $100 to do something good for my family. I could use the same $100 to do something really destructive. Money doesn't care. Yeah. And so money is like a big sponge, and it absorbs whatever is poured into it. Emotional content, family history, our uncovered desires. There's lots of things that gives money meaning to each one of us. And quite frankly, the meaning that money has for you is complex, and it's very different than the meaning that money has for your spouse.
Right. So, one common example that John and I use is just the example of being a little kid and mom or dad hands you a quarter, and you go take that quarter and you put it in the gumball machine. And you twist the little lever and you pull out that gumball and you enjoy that gumball. Mm-hmm. And at that moment, some really interesting things are happening. You are associating that gumball with money, and you're also associating it with the generosity of the parent who gave you that quarter. Mm-hmm. So suddenly that quarter has a particular kind of meaning to you. Mm-hmm. This quarter is going to be exchanged for a gumball, a nice treat.
So now money can make me happy. Money can tell me that my mom wants me to be happy. So let me give another example, and this is one from my childhood specifically. I remember when I was very young, we went to a 5 and dime store, and I was wanting a bicycle. Obviously, bicycles were kind of expensive, and our family wasn't in a position to buy one. But as I was walking around with my mom at the store, I noticed that there was a toy, a toy front loader, a little toy tractor. And for whatever reason, I suddenly had to have it. And so she told me, very smart mom, she says, well, I'll make you a deal. You can have the tractor today, which doesn't cost very much, or we can wait a while and save up for the bicycle that you want. And of course, being young and not very experienced and just wanting what was in front of me, I chose the little tractor. Took it home, really enjoyed playing with it, I think for maybe like a day or 2. Uh-huh. But pretty quick, it became apparent to me that I had made a bad choice. And so I still remember that story today as being impactful in how I think about using money, how I think about saving money, how I think about wasting money. And it taught me something about how my parents, quite frankly, were pretty clever to protect their budget. Because I just jumped right in on that. So we are all loaded up full of stories of how money started taking on deep context.
Yeah, and you can imagine, just scan back your history, how many examples of money were involved in that history. Mm-hmm. It's got to be hundreds of thousands of examples from the time you're born till the time you're an adult. Mm-hmm. It's a huge number because money is so common, it's everywhere, right? Right. So one of the examples that I can think of in my life is when I was in high school, my mom and stepdad often would fund a trip with my church to go do something fun. And I can remember the church had an event in which we would go skiing, which was really cool because I grew up in LA, so there's not a lot of snow where we lived, right? So we would go skiing, and I had been a couple times before, but I asked my mom for this particular trip, is it okay if I go on the ski trip? And she said, well, let me ask your stepdad. And I figured this is a formality, right? They've always said yes to these kinds of things, just a formality.
Yep.
So they'll have some kind of parental conversation. I don't know what goes on. I'm a high school kid. I don't know what goes on. And then she'll say yes, and I'll be good to go. But she didn't say yes. And I was really disappointed. So I try to just kind of forget that deal and move on. And then, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks later, she came back to me and said, yeah, we can afford to do this now. And I was pumped, and I did go. But this thing created, this is one example of how money was thought about and used in our family. And it created a kind of funky dynamic for me around purchases, especially big purchases. I started to think, when it was time to buy a car or time to buy a house, I started to think like, gosh, I feel kind of anxious that maybe I'm not going to be able to get this. And also at the same time, sort of this opposite feeling like, oh my gosh, I am going to get this for sure. This is a for sure thing. So it's like scarcity in one way and a little bit of entitlement on the other, right? And it created this weird kind of dynamic, which you can imagine, my wife didn't have that dynamic. She had her own meanings for money, right? So when she brought her meanings to the situation, I had my own, which I wasn't really aware of. We were talking about blindness before. I wasn't really aware of that. And it really created this complex relational situation where we'd have kind of, strange conversations about whether or not to buy a car or buy a house or whatever.
So where we're going with all of this is pretty straightforward, and that is we want to help you kind of see some of this low-hanging fruit that's been causing some stress and how it is that you talk about money. We want you to understand a little bit more about yourself, a little bit more about your partner. We want to reintroduce you to this ability to see some things like the color blue that you haven't seen maybe before or seen in a very long time. We really want to put you in a position that as you're doing something that seems very simple, which is trying to balance a budget, right? I have the amount of things that I have coming in income, the amount of things that are going out in expenses. That should be pretty easy to talk about because you can do it on a simple little calculator. It's not physically difficult. It's not mathematically difficult. But if you think about the relationship moments that you've had that have been stressful and money has been involved, it really hasn't been about math. It's been about some deeper, bigger thing. And so what we're really hoping is that through these sessions, we're going to be giving you some tools that really can help you have these discussions in a way that provide much more patience and grace and purpose in how it's in connection, absolutely. And how it is that you and your spouse or your family are going to use these resources to further your cause.
So let's talk about the homework. This is the first opportunity to do a little bit of homework. So let's talk about how we want you to do that. So find something that you can use as a consistent way to record your answers for the homework. So I think the easiest thing is just a plain paper notebook. Grab a notepad or something. But what we want you to do is make sure you hold on to that because you're going to write some things down and you want to be able to reference them later during the process. So find whatever it doesn't matter. It could be an app that you have that you take notes on, or it could be, just pen and paper or whatever. It doesn't matter to us. But dig that out, and then we want you to start with a few questions. The first one is, in what way is money important to you? So write that down individually, separately, right? Go ahead and write that down and just give some thoughts about that. And then the second one is, what are some of your non-money resources? We talked about a few a minute ago, but figure out that for your own experience, right? Your own life. And the third one is reflect on, and write this down, reflect on and share memories when money played a role when you were young. So sort of like John and I gave examples, what are the kinds of things that you remember growing up that have to do with money? And once you write those down, share your answers with each other.
So get to work on that homework, and we'll see you at the next session.